Hi everyone, I'm Jules. I'm one of the teachers at Boolean, teaching the course, the full stack course, which Giorgio just went through, where we focus around HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Postgres, etc., a few other of the technologies. We don't usually include anything about ChatGPT specifically in the course, but the approach I'm going to take will be using purely HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to implement a classic ChatGPT text adventure game. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's not the most elegant way to phrase it. But yeah, I won't be using any frameworks such as React or Tailwind. So going for pure plain sort of technology. I'm going to share my screen now. Cool, there we go. So you should be able to see now my IDE on the left, my code editor, and on the right, just my Firefox browser. So what we're going to be building, like I say, is a text-based adventure. So think of the old school sort of like novels or games where you make decisions at various points based on a setting or a premise which is presented to you. And the choices that you make change the direction that you go in the game. We're going to be using ChatGPT to make a dynamic interactive version of that. When I say we're using ChatGPT, we're not using the ChatGPT website itself. We'll be using the API which we connect to it to make these conversations, essentially. So where I'm going to start is we first need an API key from OpenAI, so the ChatGPT website. The place where you get that is once you sign up and log in to your ChatGPT account, you can go to View API Keys. And in there, you can then generate a new secret key. You can give it a name if you want. And that's the key which you're going to need for this to be able to connect to ChatGPT. You also see two other key configuration properties that I have here. One, which is just the URL to the OpenAI API link, and what is referred to here as a GPT model, because ChatGPT has had various iterations. And so over time, they've improved on them. ChatGPT 4, I believe, is the latest one, but that's not open to the public. So we're using one of the as latest as we can, which is one of the ones which are most latest free public ones, which is GPT 3.5 Turbo. You can find out more about what this means specifically in the ChatGPT website, so I won't go through that. Sorry, I've just seen there is a question. I will try and stop at various points to address questions because there's quite a lot to go through. So I'll do like 2, maybe 3 stopping points, but very quickly then. Fatih, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry for interrupting, Jules.
Right.
As we just starting, is it any repo that we can take the codes from so we can write with you in real time?
Cool, good question. There is a repo. It will be shared with you after the workshop today. It's going to be very difficult to follow along because I'm going to be going along at quite a fast pace because there's quite a lot to build. But you can look back at the video later on, and with the repo, you can then follow along as well. Yeah,
that makes sense. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. That's a great question. I'm going to very briefly stop my share whilst I add my own secret key. It is a secret after all. So I need to put that in, and there we go. Cool. Great. So it should be back on now. Great. All right. So that's that. So I've got a bit of a setup here. It's just a very plain template. I'm not going to go through any CSS as part of this demo because it's not that important in terms of what we're implementing. So I'm going to focus purely on the HTML and the JavaScript side of things. So what you can see on here is just a very simple template with a very small body, with a header, whoops, and some buttons held within a div. Currently, they don't really do anything interesting. The highlighting is just from the CSS already in there. So what I'm first going to do is go into my main.js. So this is my JavaScript file where everything will be running. I'm going to create a function called init. And this is the main function which will start the game. And the first thing I need to do is to make sure that these buttons actually start to do something. So if I go like this, const genres equals document dot query selector all dot genre. So what this do here is this will use a JavaScript to grab these button elements here. I'm using the query selector, and it's selecting the dot genre. So it's selecting all elements in my HTML which have the genre class, which are just my 3 buttons. And what I'm going to do for this is say genres dot for each. So for each genre, which is a button, I'm going to go button dot add event listener. So I'm adding an event listener, and the specific event listener I'm going to add is click. So that whenever I click on the buttons, it will pick up the event, being the click, and it will do something. And for now, all I'm going to do is send an alert message saying you selected genre what's it, button dot data set dot genre. I'll explain what this data set is in a second. Let me just give you a bit more space, and let's do some formatting then very quickly. Cool. Save that. And so now when I click on, for example, this one, this happened last time I did it as well. I've defined the function. I now need to invoke or call the function. But also, importantly, because of the way this is structured using sort of traditional HTML and JavaScript, what we need to do is go into the index.html, and within the head tag, head, not header, the head is where we have a lot of the information around metadata and a few other things we're doing, like this is where I import the CSS style sheet. We need to do something similar with the JavaScript that I've just created. So what I do is I add a scripts tag, give it a source, and it's my main.js. And I'm going to defer it. So what this means is this will essentially import my JavaScript so that the HTML has access to it. And because I define my function here, and then I also call it, when the HTML imports the JavaScript, it will immediately call the function, and thus will apply the event listeners to my buttons. I use the defer keyword here to make sure that the JavaScript is only loaded or imported after the page has loaded, and that ensures that the sequence of events happens correctly. So now let's go back here, click on this. Cool. You should hopefully see a pop-up box here. You might not be able to see very clearly what the text says, but it says you selected genre horror. I don't know if I can zoom in on this. No. So great. So what it's done there is it's just popping up the message box and then just displaying the text I have here. How did it know which genre I've selected? So the middle one, for example, is spy film. And the right one here is superheroes, Marvel superheroes. It knows what genre I've selected from the button because of this button.dataset.genre. This dataset property is set using this data attribute here. So any HTML element can accept a data dash whatever as a custom property you're adding to that element. So that's why I've got for the first one is horror, the second one is spy film, and the third one is Marvel superheroes. So if, for example, I wanted to add another button, but this does something else, like okay, and I want this instead to be a message, then to access this property, which is data-message, I'll do button.dataset.message to be able to access that property. That's just very quickly a bit on that. It's quite a useful thing in HTML there. Cool. The next thing I need to do is back in my JavaScript, go to the top. I'm now going to create a function which will support making requests for me. By request, I mean making requests to the ChatGPT API. And what I need for this, so this is going to be an async function, URL and data. So it's asynchronous, meaning we're dealing with promises. Hopefully that means something to some of you. It means the order in which things happen isn't guaranteed. So we have to say, okay, this is going to take a bit of time because we're making requests external to my laptop. So I want to wait for this to happen and finish before progressing with the rest of the code. That's a brief summary of what promises are. We're taking two parameters, a URL and a data. And I'm going to have a variable here where I'm going to await and make a fetch request. So I'm going to fetch data from some URL, and the format of the data looks something like this. Headers. We want to add some content type just to define and let the server know what content is being sent. That content is JSON. Oops, JSON. And I need my authorization header. This is to make sure that then I can actually, it will then send to the ChatGPT API a bearer token, which shows that I am a legitimate signed user, not signed up user of the platform and am allowed to make these requests. Bearer. This is going to be with config.api key. So this is now me using the API key I generated in, if you recall, in the Open API platform, so that I can send this key over and it will recognize that it is a valid key and the requests I'm making are allowed. That's what that's going on here. This underscore config is the object which I defined earlier in the config.js file. Cool. So that's the headers. I need to define the method of my request. I'm sending only post requests. So I'm creating, I'm expecting resources to be created. So it's a post request. And the body of the data that I'm sending is going to be JSON.stringify, the data parameter for arguments that I'm passing through. So that's that for now. But to be able to access my config file, I also need to import it over here as well. So what we're dealing with here is essentially global JavaScript objects. So by importing it into the HTML here, I can still access it within my main.js file as well, because of the global scope of how we're defining things. So for now, that doesn't do anything. That's just setting things up for me. What I need now is up here, I'm going to have for now a ChatGPT messages, simply an empty array. This array I will be using to store the messages that I send and receive to and from the ChatGPT API. And that's important for what we're doing, because then that allows ChatGPT to maintain the context and the history of what's going on. This will make more sense as I actually start to implement things. Cool. So now let's actually start the game. This is, again, asynchronous. And I'm going to need the genre as a parameter. Just to clarify, actually, because I've jumped into this quickly, and that this might not be familiar to some people, is that I'm using here arrow functions. So it's doing exactly the same thing as the classic function definition. They're just plain old functions, just a different way of writing them, just in case anyone was wondering. Cool. So what we need to do is first we need to send a message to the ChatGPT API to initialize the game. So using my empty array, or currently empty array, I'm going to push into it my first message to set up this game. I'm going to have a role of system, and the content I'm going to have to copy and paste because this is quite a long one. So let's see, where are we? Over here. Cool. And I'll explain what's going on in a second. What I'm pushing into here is just an object with two values, the role and the content. And this is the structure which ChatGPT API expects to receive messages or requests from outside. So it's not like it's something which I'm randomly choosing, it's just how the API is set up. I'm saying the role is system so that it understands it's something which the ChatGPT API system needs to do, and it's not an interaction by me, the user, necessarily. I'll expand this a bit for now. So all this is saying here is I want you to play like a classic text adventure game. I'm a protagonist, don't refer to yourself, etc., etc. And what I'm going to do is I'm asking it here to say, start a game, and the theme of the game is going to be the genre that I select from these buttons. So it could be horror, it could be a spy film, it could be Marvel superheroes. So that will help it set the setting. And I'm limiting it to 150 characters so that it's not too verbose for me. And what I also want it to send to me is an array of 3 possible actions that the player can perform, so that when it sends to me some sort of premise, I can then respond and say, I want to do action 1, action 2, or action 3. So that's setting things up. But the catch is that one of these actions will be fatal and ends the game, so it results in a game over. And lastly, down here is saying, I'm giving it a template of how to send the data back to me. So I'm saying I want it to send back a JSON response with the setting and some sort of text description of the setting, and then an array of the 3 actions. And again, these will be strings as well. So that's me trying to set up the initialization of the game. So then after that, I want to actually send the request. So now I can make use of my make request function here to send my request to the API. So await, make request. The URL that I'm choosing to send to is going to be based on the config.api base URL. And this is the URL which I showed you earlier at the very beginning as well. But I want to send this, I need to send this to a specific endpoint of the ChatGPT API because it has various, what's the best word to describe it? It has various engines, I guess, in a way, or various things it can do. And what I want specifically is the chat completions engine, so that it knows that I want it to send back some chat in response to what I'm sending it, as opposed to, for example, the image generation, which will have separately as well a bit later on. All right. As part of this, I also have to give it a bit of setup for it as well. And again, for the config, I need to specify which engine to use. Oops, how did I say it? GPT model. So that's the GPT 3.5 Turbo, which we're using here, just so it knows which to use. The messages that I'm sending is then the history of messages. So this is why we need to keep track of the messages we're sending and receiving, because these always get sent as part of the request so that the API is aware of the context and the history. And lastly, temperature. The temperature is a setting which ChatGPT uses to determine how much it can predict the response based on previous text. So there's a value between 0 and 1, and lets you control how confident the model should be when making these predictions about the responses and the text it's going to get back. Having a lower temperature means it's going to take fewer risks, and the completions that it sends me will be more accurate and deterministic. But a higher value will result in a more diverse range of completions. And that's important for this setting because I don't want it to always give me the same setting or the same number of actions whenever I run the game. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit boring. So that's that. So just going back again up here, a bit of setup to add some messages to initialize the game, and then sending a request to the API, And then we want to use the response we get back. So the response will be assigned to this variable, chat.json. And what we get back are a message. So chat.json dot choices 0 dot message. This is a dot zero here, not dot zero. I'm accessing the first element of this choices array because that's the format in which ChatGPT always sends it back. And I only ever want the first one. In fact, I think it's always a single element array. We will also have some content, which we want to parse into JSON, or parse from JSON, sorry, from the message itself. And then lastly, we'll have finally what we actually really want from this, which is the setting. So that's the 150 word setting we get from ChatGPT and the 3 actions in response. And as part of this, like I said, we have to maintain the message history. I will push into my ChatGPT messages array this original message so that it can have access to all of the content, including the setting and the actions. Last few bits, and then I'll do a quick pause for some questions. Let's just see if we're actually getting this data back. Let's get the setting and the actions. Cool. So I'm just going to, once I get the response back, I'll just get some console logs to appear. Actually, let's make them, no, console log is fine. And then, now what I want to do, because currently I've defined this function, but it's not doing anything. What I want is that once I select one of these genres, it will initialize the game for me. So instead of this original alert, I can now call the start game function instead, and I will pass through the genre that we're playing. Oops, one more. Where am I going? I see. There we go. Cool. There we go. So start game, passes in the genre. The genre is used to set the right setting, to apply the right setting for our game, and then it makes a request. Let's see what we get back if I expand the window a bit. Open my dev console. So I should get something back in my console with the setting and the actions. What's going on here? Organization, you can copy. Unquote promise, config is not defined. Apologies. What's going on here? Order probably matters. No, this is the risk of live demos. Have I missed something? Too many underscores. There we go. That was easy. Live demos never go smoothly. Ooh, okay. Here's one more. ChatJSON is not defined. So let's have a look at the network request and see what's going on. So I will have made a post request to the OpenAI. Oh, I can close this. You get to see some live debugging. This is what happens in class as well sometimes. So we can see I've sent the request over, and it's got the content for the messages, the model, and the temperature, and the response. The response is here. Interesting. But it's saying ChatJSON is not defined. Except it is very much defined. Have I made this asynchronous? Yes. Await, make request. Case make. I'm not actually sending back. I'm not returning my response. and response.json. Cool, great. Let's have a look again. Third time lucky. I think that was 3, might be 4. Woo! Okay, cool. So I've got back a setting from the API, and it says here, you're standing in a dark and eerie forest. The trees loom over you, casting long shadows. The air is thick with an ominous silence. And I get back 3 options. I can look around, I can walk deeper into the forest, or I can leave the forest. So cool. That's the basic first setup for the game. I have an initial premise, and I have 3 options. And what I want to do going forward from here is that whenever I select one of these actions, ChatGPT will receive that action and it will generate a subsequent setting of what happens next. And what happens next could either be another setting, so a progression of the story, of the adventure, or it could easily game over as well. So cool, that's the first sort of initial setup and the main bump for here. I'll do a quick pause for some questions. Which version of ChatGPT is using? Yeah, 3.5. Where did you find all the information like ChatGPT endpoints and temperature? Good question, Poppy. That's over in the ChatGPT documentation. So back in this platform, there should be somewhere, I believe it's just in the help. So there's a lot of information about the API here. It might be the open API. And if I go here, completions, I believe. Yeah, there'll be a lot of documentation within this on how to use completions, what are the properties. There should be an actual, a proper reference API for this. I can't find that right now, but it'll all be there. Any other questions for now? How do we get the API key? So that's within, once you sign up for an account, click on this personal bit, go to view API keys, and create a new secret key. And then you use this key. This is a shortened version for security. You use this key to make your requests. Cool. Any other questions from anyone so far? Is the API key free? Yes, but there will be usage limits. So that's just something you need to be aware of, but they're fairly generous, fairly. Whilst y'all have a think, let me see what my next step is. Ooh. Poppy, is it you creating the setting initially, e.g. for spooky, you have written the sentence, you are in a spooky wood, or where is this coming from? Cool, good question. So what's happening is when I click one of these buttons, it will send this message here to the ChatGPT API. And that's going to start the game. And it's saying, I want you to play like a classic text adventure game. So then the engine knows, okay, I need to create some sort of game for you. And I've given it instructions on what to send back to me. And I'm saying, you will have a theme of something, and the genre is defined by which button I press. Because you can see here, the genre is just passed into the start game function, which we get from the button dataset. Recall that in the button, we have this data genre attribute, which is either horror, spy film, or Marvel superheroes. So when I send this message, it will send me back some random setting using its language model in response to my request here. So if, for example, I go and click on spy film here, I now have a different setting. You find yourself in a dimly lit underground lair. The walls are adorned with high-tech gadgets and surveillance screens. And the actions are inspect the gadgets, check the surveillance screens, or search for an exit. So all of this is just a response from the ChatGPT engine in response to the first request I have sent here. And just for completion, let's do the Marvel superheroes. There we go. You're standing on a bustling city street in the heart of New York City. The sounds of car horns and chattering pedestrians fill the air. And again, 3 options to explore the city, look for any signs of trouble, or grab a bite to eat. Nice and casual. Cool. Thanks for the questions. I'll progress for now, and I'll stop again a bit later on. So what we've noticed so far is that when I make this request, there's quite a bit of lag. And it's not a lag on my computer or anything. It's just the amount of time it takes for the request to be sent, processed by ChatGPT, and then sent back to me. And that's why we have to use this async await notation, because there is that delay in the request being sent, and then finally currently displaying the response in my dev console. So what I want to do is add some loading information so that visibly when someone's playing the game, they can see that they need to wait. So let's have a new div. It's going to have a class of loading and hidden. Again, I'm not going to cover any CSS as part of this demo. You just have to trust that it's there and it's okay. And what I'm going to do is just have an image appear. And the source of the image is just within one of my folders here. Loader.gif alt equals loadings icon. Close image. Cool. So now whenever, well, I have to do a bit more, but what I'm anticipating is whenever I'm waiting for a request to happen, this loading icon will appear. And to determine that, I'm going to create another function to do this. So show loading animation equals is loading. So I'm going to send through an argument to say whether or not there is a request happening, so whether or not we need to show the loading icon. The loading screen is just going to be what I just added. So getting my query selector, I just need to grab the loading element, which is just going to be this, so the div I just added. I'm going to say if is loading, then we go loading screen dot class list dot remove hidden. So currently there are 2 classes on this div, the loading class and the hidden class. The hidden class just doesn't show the image over here until I remove this class. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm saying, okay, we are in a loading state, so remove this class. Otherwise, the opposite. So when we're done loading, we hide it again. Formatting, cool. And so now when I go here, so once I've pushed a message and I know I'm about to make the request, I'm going to start showing the loading animation. And then afterwards, when everything is back, so I know here everything's finished. So now I can go show loading animation false. Let's see how that looks. Click. There we go. Nice. Okay, so that's a bit more useful as a game to show people that something is happening, as opposed to, oh, it's broken, and you click about 10 times to make it work, because that's obviously how it always works. Nice. Optionally, I was going to add some error message handling here, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to just skip that for now. But it will be within the full code base that you can view when you get access to that after this workshop. Okay, let's do something a little bit more useful in terms of moving the displays we have here, the responses we have here in the console log, into the actual web page itself. So what I'm going to need is up over here. So I've got my header. So below my header, I've got my main as a container class. So in my main element, I'm going to put all of this stuff in there. So that's where it belongs. And between the between my loading icon, my loading div, and my buttons, I'm going to add another div class. It's going to be the stage container. For now, that's going to be empty, and we'll see why that is and how it gets populated in a second. And then lastly, well, not lastly, but following on from that, I'm going to be using this template element. And this is a really interesting one because the template doesn't actually show up on the screen until it's used in a certain way. So for example, if I add some key tags here saying hello world, you can't see it here anywhere. But if I make this a div, you can. So literally, it's acting as a template where it's ready to be used and modified in some way. It's a really interesting property of just plain HTML. So I need another div here, which is the stage set. And within this, I'm going to have my stage image. And also then my stage setting. So this is where the text will go for my game setting text. I'm just adding a bit of optional commenting here just to help remind me what's going on in these templates. So that's the stage set in terms of the context of the game. And then I also want a container for my stage action. So this is where my buttons will go. 3 buttons with actions. That's where those are going to go. Nice. And then after that, what we need to do next is sorry, a bit of mind blank. Cool, there we go. Before I go any further, I'm going to zoom out a little bit and just show that, you know, I'm not doing very much at the moment, but there's already a fair bit of code in this file in my main.js. So optionally, I'm just going to extract this out into another file. This is completely optional. It's just for my own perception of good code quality. I'm going to move these out here. And in my index.html, I will also import this here. So again, because I'm importing into the HTML, whatever functions I define here will be available in the global scope. So that means the main.js can still access these functions, even though they're in a different file. Now, this just nicely tidies things up a little bit for me in my main.js here, which will get more and more verbose as we go along. So what I need next is to then start setting things up so that I can actually populate the page with the actual game itself. So again, document.query selector. And I'm going to select the stage container. So the stage container, recall, is the one here where there's nothing in here at the moment. And I need to grab this so that I can start to populate it with data whilst using the template that I set up here. This will make more sense once I actually get into the nitty-gritty. So then let's say I'm going to have a create stage function. So this is the function that will be responsible for then creating the setting and showing me the following follow-up actions I can take. So we have, with my top template, lots of query selecting here. So we want the stage template. So I'm using an ID selector here. All the previous ones have been class selectors, but because this is a unique element, I'm going to use the ID just to make it a bit easier and just more indicative of what I'm doing. I also need the stage, which is going to be my stage template. dot content dot clone. Whoops. Clone node true. So what this is doing here is going to grab the stage template that I had over here, and it's going to make a clone of it. So that then it's no longer just, it will clone the content so that it's no longer just a template element which doesn't display, and we will start making it so that it's a real element that does display on the page. That's a sort of like summary of what we're doing here. We're cloning it. And then stage. Within the stage, I also have to select, yes, stage.query selector, select for the stage setting, which is where my text is going to go. Dot inner HTML setting. Dot stage setting. So this stage setting is the paragraph tag here. So I'm saying, okay, grab the paragraph tag and set the inner HTML to equal the setting. And this is the parameter, the first parameter of my create stage function. And that's going to pass through the setting that I get back from the ChatGPT response. So it's just adding text, TLDR. And then also then have to append my clone. So now I can append this element, so the paragraph tag, to the stage container, which I queried up here. So then we'll add the p tag into this container here. I also need to then do the same thing for the buttons. So const actions HTML is equal to actions.map. So the actions here, this argument is going to be the array of the 3 actions that I get back from the ChatGPT response. And because it's an array, I can map through it. So I'm just going to iterate through each of the actions and do something with those buttons. Well, with that text that will turn into buttons. So for each action, I'm going to create a string button action button. Oops, end button. Not join. Missed a curly brace there. Again, I'll explain what's going on here in a little bit once I get a little bit further in, and I'll explain the entire flow for you. Document.query selector for the stage actions, so we know where to put my buttons into. Stage actions dot inner HTML is equal to the actions HTML. Lastly, const buttons equals document dot query selector all of the dot stage actions buttons dot for each. Quite a lot going on here. I'll get there, don't worry. Button dot add event listener. So now I'm adding again event listeners to these buttons so that they do something. So again, we're making a click event listener. For this one for now, again, I'm going to just alert with the button inner text. Cool. So let's review what's going on here now. Oh, I'm not actually making use of this. What's going on there? Anyway, okay, no worries. So over here, like I said, this is going to be an array of actions. So it's going to look something like this. Action 1, action 2, and action 3. So that's what this actions will look like. I'm just going to loop through this array, and for each of these string actions, I'm creating a button. So I'm using JavaScript to write HTML essentially here. That's what I'm doing here with this string. Writing HTML buttons and joining them together so that it will become button elements that I can insert into my HTML. So at the end of it, it will look something like this. 1. And 2. I won't worry too much about precise linting action 3. So that's what this is going to generate for me. Based on these inputs, it will create 3 buttons which look like this. And then grabbing the stage actions, which is this bit here, I'm going to append those buttons so that they get inserted into this div. So well, we're not quite appending, we're just saying the in HTML is this. And then adding the event listener for the click to each of these buttons. Cool. Let's start to see that in action. And the way we'll do that is I can now remove these console logs. And I will create the stage once I receive back the actual settings and actions from the ChatGPT API. I can close this. Let's go for horror. Nice. So what we got before in the dev console is now being displayed on the page. You find yourself in a dimly lit hallway. The air is heavy with an eerie silence. You see a door at the end of the hallway. And I have 3 actions here. I can open the door. Alert. Walk towards the door. That's another alert. Turn around and leave the hallway. And the final alert. So we're getting there. We're getting more and more something that looks like an actual game. If I click on this again, it will just regenerate for me. Not very elegantly at the moment. The same response. Okay. That sometimes happens. Let's go for the spy. Cool. And then we find ourselves in a high-tech lab. The room is filled with blinking screens and mysterious equipment. A locked door stands in front of you. Cool. So we're starting to be able to see it develop, but it's not quite there yet, obviously. Has a bit of refinement to do. Once I get this mostly working, then I'll pause again for some questions. Cool. So the next thing I need to do is, instead of just my current alert, which just shows me the same text that I've got already in front of me, I need to start using this to populate my response to ChatGPT. And by response, I mean in response to the setting and saying, this is the action I have chosen to take. So I believe somewhere around here is fine. Let's create another function. Add action message. I'm going to call this. And we're going to go back to our ChatGPT messages array here. So that currently just has my setup array, my setup text, sorry, and the response with the setting and the actions. So now I'm going to tell it, this is the action I'm taking as part of this. So ChatGPT messages, push, role. Oops. So now instead of system, my role here is the user. So it's saying, okay, you're interacting with me as a user. It's giving it the context of what's going on. And the content is going to be, I'm going to have to do a bit of copy paste again, but essentially I'm going to pass through the message of the action I'm taking. So we'll send through the message of examine the equipment, for example, into here. But in addition to that, I need to give it some more instructions on how to handle this. Copy paste. And this is saying, if the action is fatal, the action list is empty. Don't give any text other than the JSON object. Your responses are only in a JSON format like this. So it's fairly similar to my setup here, but I'm giving instructions on how to respond to me. And what I'm doing here is I'm saying I want the actions array to be empty if I want it to game over. Otherwise, it will continue to respond to me with the 3 actions that I told it originally to respond to me with, if it's not fatal. And so instead of that, then I can start doing this instead. So instead of alerting, I'm going to add the action message to the messages history. And now I need to do a bit of refactoring again to handle the fact that we want to send this as part of the button clicks. So let's see. create stage, create actions, set stage. Okay, this usually takes me a little bit of time to get my head around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract this bit out to its own function, so it's a little bit clearer what's going on. So create stage is one thing, then create actions is going to be something else. So currently it's something like this, copy paste. So this is currently the same as what I had up here before. I can now remove this parameter because it's not used, and I just have actions down here. And I'll need to make sure this is implemented as part of this. So I'm splitting this into two different functions, which is a good practice in terms of single responsibility of our functions, but also it will allow me to more clearly do what I want to do with sending my actions to ChatGPT. That goes there. And cool. So I also need to separate something else here. Where's my start? This is my start game. ChatGPT messages await set stage. Cool. So next, another function to set the stage, which will take just the genre, that's fine. And in my set stage, what I'm going to do is take, where is it? Take this stuff and move it in there. No, that's not what I want to do. Apologies, let me get my head around this. Create setting, start game set stage. Oh, got myself in a muddle. The pressure of performing live. Cool. Okay, so my set stage, I need to do two things. HTML, in HTML is equal to an empty string. So what I'm doing here is, remember when I my these buttons, it was just adding the text into my screen and just making it a bit illegible. And that's not what I want. I want it to progress through a bit like chapters in a book or pages in a book, so I don't see what's happened immediately on this page. So I want to make sure whenever I'm setting the stage for the next action or next set of actions and the premise, I need to just reset everything to be blank. And then now I can make this here, I'll make request. Where is that? That's down here. Cool. So show loading animation. I'm going to move all this into that bit here. Cool. So that makes more sense now. So the flow that it's going to be is the page loads, or we add the event listeners to the buttons, and it starts the game. And start game currently will just push the messages, push the message to this array, and then I want to call set stage. This is going to be asynchronous. What I want to do here is await set stage and the genre that I get passed through. So we do the initial setup for the first game, set the stage, clear everything, and then make the request to the API. This will be important because I'm going to reuse this set stage function whenever we click on one of the actions, not the genres, but the actions. And the genre gets passed through to where? Oh, yeah, okay, that's where. So in create actions, I will need to take the genre, because what I want to do with this is now start to use my add action message, because I need to say which genre we're setting this in. So actually, no. What we need is this. This will create the actions buttons. Actions, it will create the buttons first, and then also we need to now we need to set the stage. And this also needs to be concealed this. Because we call this, we say, okay, I have selected this button, like go down the hallway. That will append it to our history here. And then we want to set the stage again. So we'll refresh what's happening on the screen. That should be everything that I need for this. Let me double check. Create stage, create actions. Need to pass the genre through to my create actions. Create actions takes genre and the actions. Wonderful. Let's see this in action now. Marvel superheroes. You're in the bustling streets of New York City, surrounded by towering skyscrapers. The sounds of car horns and chatter fill the air. I can look for a nearby phone booth, head towards the Avengers Tower, or explore Central Park. Let's go to Avengers Tower. That sounds fairly safe. So now send the request, and now it's come back with a different setting. You arrive at the majestic Avengers Tower, so it's aware of what action I've taken and creating for me a new setting. Looking up at its impressive height and sleek design, the Avengers logo proudly displayed at the top. And now I can enter the tower, take a photo of the tower, or walk around the perimeter. I'll enter the tower. And then we can go through again. You step into the Avengers Tower and you're greeted by state-of-the-art facilities, etc., etc. I'm trying to wait for it to see if we get to a stage where it games over, possibly. Wow, usually it's much more strict with me than this. Cool. And then eventually it gets to the stage where it gives me a setting, but no actions. The setting is you bravely attempt to lift a massive weight, channeling your inner superhero strength. However, the weight proves to be too much for you, resulting in an unfortunate accident. So that's the game over message, and I can do no further actions now as part of this. So we've created a thing here where we can progress through the story, and it interactively, dynamically creates a new setting each time based on our actions. I think it's pretty cool. To add a little bit more pizzazz to it. And so for this one, what I want to do is to add an image as part of my setting so that it can make things a bit more interesting. So let's make use of one of the other capabilities of ChatGPT. You've seen probably a lot, even before ChatGPT really started to take off. It's a lot of AI-generated images, and there is a lot of controversy around stealing of like artists' copyrights, etc. But let's avoid that issue for now, or skirt around that issue. So I'm going to create another function where I create an image based on the genre and the setting. And we're going to get a generated image back by using, again, my make request function, which I made at the very beginning. And this URL will be a little bit different. So I have my config, again, the config.base URL. And now I'm going to send a request to the images generations endpoint. And the data I'm sending through for that is to apply a prompt, which is, this is a story based on some genre. Oops. And I'm going to give it the setting as well. So this will give it more information on what sort of image to generate for me. I'm going to tell it to generate one image for me, n for number. I'm going to give it a certain size because I don't want the request to take too long with large images. So 512 by 512 is more than sufficient. And the response format, the response underscore format, is in the form of a URL. Something happened there. Cool. So that's going to be my image over here. Nice. And then what do I do with this image? I then need to go const, my actual image that I'm going to use is the generated image dot data dot URL. This is just me navigating through the response that I get back from ChatGPT. It's going to send back a data array because there can be more than one image sent back, hence why I set n to be 1. So I'm only getting the first one and getting the URL property of that. And so now I can do document dot query selector. Love the query selector. Stage image. The stage image is the one here. So within my template, I had a setting div where I want the image at the top and then my setting text at the bottom, or below it, sorry. And then the actions are at the bottom. So in my stage image, I want the inner HTML to be taking the same format of what I did with the buttons. Image equals a source of the image URL that I got, image. And I'm just going to give it an alt text as well, just for those who may be partially sighted, just give them some more reference. Cool. So that would generate an image for me and append it to the stage image part of the game. Let's see how that works. There we go. Oh, Jules, you haven't called it. There we go. And we needed the genre and the setting. Cool. All right, let's try again. Ooh. Because it's making 2 requests, now it's taking a little bit longer to do everything. Way, nice. Okay. You're in a dimly lit alleyway. The sound of rain echoes through the narrow space. There is a suspicious-looking door at the end of the alleyway. Nice. It's really clever, isn't it? Like, we're in an alleyway. We have water for the rain. It's not quite the end of the alleyway, but close enough. And then we have our 3 actions. And now if I decide to, say, continue down the alleyway, it's, I think, oh no, game's over. Oh, no, there we go. Ooh, that's creepy. As you continue down the alley, you sense a presence behind you. Before you can react, a group of armed henchmen surrounds you. It's a trap. So unfortunately, I've gamed over already. It's a bit brutal sometimes. But you can see it's generated a new image for me for this new setting that I've arrived at. Nice. So let's get on to the final bit then, because I keep landing on this game over, but there's no obvious way of what I can do, next and how to handle this scenario. So what I want to do is say down here over my create stage, saying if actions.length, then I'll create the stage. Else, I'm going to create a new function in a second called game over. If I can spell, that usually helps. Game over for the setting. So I keep pressing the wrong button. Cool. So let's see, where's good for this? Let's put the game over just above the set stage. This takes a setting. And for this one, so again, I'm going to have to do the same thing with my template. So let's do a second example with the template. Template, you have an ID of game over template. And in this, I have a div, my class, property game over container. Well, my main content will go into. I will want a game over logo. It can just be, oh, there we go. Cool. Let's have a skull or 3. Don't know what my ID is doing. There we go. So let's have some skulls and then an HQ to say game over. I will need then I want to say, what's happened? Why is it gaming over? So let's add for this, the game over message. And lastly, a button so that we can play again. Cool. This won't actually work here. I need to actually implement my function, which is over here. So now, using my template again, I'm going to const my game over template. It's equal to the document dot query selector of the game over template. And then for my actual game over, I'm going to go game over template dot content. So we're going to clone node again, same thing as what we did before. So that we can start using this template as a real HTML element. And what do we need for this? We need the game over query selector. For the message dot game over message, I'm going to set this to the setting. And this setting will be the final message you get, where there's the henchmen are around you and you're trapped. That's what this is going to be. And very simply, what I'm going to do for the button to play again is just to refresh the page. Very simple mechanism. I'm going to navigate from the game over container into the button element. So here I'm combining a class selector for the game over container, which is this div here, combining it with a element selector, so just button, and that's just the one button in here. For this, I'm going to add an event listener of click, classic click, and this is just going to go window.location.reload. So this is the JavaScript way of refreshing your page. Last stage container, append my game over element. So what have I got down here where I implement it? Create stage. Interesting, create stage isn't asynchronous. I've just realized. Okay. Game over, setting, nice. That should be right. Let's see. Let's go for horror again. It's maybe forever the game over now, I bet. You wake up in a dimly lit room surrounded by cobwebs. The air is damp and there is a faint smell of decay. Ooh, interesting cobwebs. I don't see a door, so that's interesting. Look for a light switch. I don't know if my connection is slow or if ChatGPT is just having a moment. Let's see. Okay, so I was about to game over, but I do have a bug somewhere. So let's see. Game over template is null. Why is that? So I've got my document query selector, game over template, which is this. Interesting. Why are you null? I accidentally added a hashtag thinking it was my ID selector. Let's try again. I'll run through it instead of waiting for it. Search for a way out. Proceed down the hallway. Check for any traps. There we go. Wait for the image. Am I not handling image generation? Interesting. Let's see. Create actions, create image. Another bug. Some other document selector, line 42, alt setting. That doesn't seem right. Let's have a look. Stage image, HTML, inner tag, image setting. This one, genre, and that. Ah, is it because? Actually, it's got me a bit stumped. That should be fine. Let's see. Create actions. Creates the actions, sure. And then after we game over, we append the container. And then create image. Should just be that, really. What was the other error message? It's got something else here. Query selector stage actions. Stage setting, create stage. Ah, I see. Actually, I thought I saw. Actually, questions. So whilst I have a chance to process, let's see what's going on here in questions. Is this still ChatGPT API generating the URLs where it finds images relevant to the story? Short answer, yes. Could you add additional statements to the setting, e.g. allow me to choose at least 6 actions before any action could lead to a death/game over? Yes, Poppy. So if you want to do that, we would just have to modify our message here. Because remember, what we said is one of these actions is fatal and ends the game. So if we add some sort of instruction to the effect of what you want here, like allow me to choose at least 6 actions before any action could lead to a death or game over, would implement that, in theory. I haven't tested it out, so I'm not sure. But yes, as long as we provide the right message, we can pretty much tell it to do anything within the realms of what it is able to do. But logic like this shouldn't be too difficult. How can we create a dialogue between the user and ChatGPT in this game setting? I would like to create the option for the user to write sentences and get responses, not only to choose options. Cool, interesting. Then what we'd do is, instead of having the 3 buttons here, what we could put instead is some sort of input box, a text input box. And in that, then users can type in what they want to do in response to the setting we receive. And we use that to send back to the ChatGPT API. So instead of doing this here, this message, well, all we change is the message being the text content from the input box. So it's nothing too difficult. Again, just a few query selectors here and there to make sure we can grab the content and send that as part of our add action message function. Well, where can I find this information to learn more? Hopefully that should provide everything you need to know, Julieta. Any additional questions whilst I try and debug why this is happening? I see. Should just do this here. I love live debugging. I'm glad you like that, Kimberly. Oh, sorry, Eli said, since we are pushing to an array, are all the elements in the array being sent to ChatGPT every time we take an action? So every time ChatGPT receives the initial setting, the one that says role system. I will show you that whilst I test if this works. Network. So in our network tab, we should be able to see everything that happens, all the requests we make. That should be fine. Cool. Let's go for spy film again. So here is our first post request. Actually, let's make this bigger. The code is less important now for this answer. So we can see in the request, this is the initial setting. Well, you can't see very well, probably. This is the first message we set because we're just starting the game off here. And we get a response back. And so then this is the post request for the image generation. You can see this is a story based on a spy film, and then it gives the setting. So then this responds with the URL of the image. And so then the question which Eli had, let's go for again, is are all the elements in the array being sent to ChatGPT every time? Yes. So if we now make another post request, you find yourself in a dimly lit alleyway, the rain is pouring down, and the sound of sirens echoes in the distance. Let's check for your surroundings. So now we make another post request. And in this request, you can now see the history. So this first one is setting of the game. The second one is the action I took in which I just clicked on. And then, no, apologies. Sorry, this is the first one is me saying to ChatGPT, start the game, this is what you need to do. This is the response I got. So you find yourself in the dimly lit alleyway. And then this is me telling it, okay, this is the action I've taken. Check your surroundings. If this action is fatal, etc., etc. And then the response I've got back to this is what you see on the screen now about, as you scan your surroundings, you notice a suspicious figure lurking in the shadows. Your instincts tell you to proceed with caution. If I were to say, if I just stay hidden and observe, now we can see again more of the history. So yes, this is the ChatGPT history array we have at the top of the code. It does get sent every time so that it can maintain the context of what's going on. Essentially sort of quickly scans through to see what has happened. That is a terrifying image it's got there. Spavilig stoppy. You're welcome, Eli. Thank you very much for the response, Jules. You're welcome to Jessa as well. Cool. Okay, let's see if we can get to the stage where we game over. See if I fixed it. Take a photo as evidence. That sounds dangerous thing to do. Run for your life. Fight back. Hide in a nearby building. Fight back. That'll surely game over. No. You quickly assess your surroundings for any potential weapons. Spotting a metal pipe nearby, you grab it and prepare to defend yourself. What is this? As the figure approaches, a fierce fight ensues. Strike with a metal pipe. Wow, this is quite a long one. With a swift and powerful swing, you strike the figure with a metal pipe, incapacitating them. The danger is temporarily averted, allowing you to continue your mission. That's very nice and easy and convenient. Search the figure for clues. You thoroughly search the figure's pockets and find a crumpled piece of paper with a coded message. It seems like a vital clue to unravel the mystery. Contact your handler for guidance. It's quite good actually, as we have to admit. Like the content it generates. All right, let's continue until we get to game over. We'll be here forever otherwise, because I know we want to leave some time at the end. Blend in with the crowd. Eavesdrop. That's surely going to get me in trouble. Oh. Tail one of the individuals. Sneak into the building. Oh my goodness. Search for valuable information. No, come on. Disable the surveillance cameras. I have no idea what's going on. I can't believe this is going for so long. I don't think it wants me to game over anymore. All right. Whilst I continue this, are there any other questions from anyone? I think the one thing I do notice about this in terms of the current setup is there is a lot of repetition. So it is something to be aware of when using ChatGPT, because it generates responses and has some idea of context, but I don't know if, for example, I could maybe say, don't repeat any previous actions, if it would understand that or not. And actually it could, because we do send the entire history over, so maybe that would help. Juan likes the project. Thank you. It is quite fun actually. This was my first ChatGPT API project as well, and it's quite interesting to look through it. I know I've gone through it quite quickly, and maybe it's hard to grasp everything that's happening. I'm just going to refresh. But once you sort of dig into it and understand all the parts, it's quite logical. Pull out the help. There we go. Oh no. Oh, we've got a new error, network error. We've been sending too many requests. And we again have a null query selector. Stage image. Ah, I know. It's because of the setup for what I have here. The stage image is only for when we're actually in a non-fatal state. So I could either not do the image generation, or if I think that's interesting as part of this, then I could, for example, add this here probably, and hopefully see if it uses that for this. Last time I do this, I promise. Open a door. That sounds fatal. Try to force the door open. Will this work? Yes. Game over. You gather all the strength and attempt to force the door open. I don't know what happened there. Is it sending multiple requests? It sent 2 for some reason. Okay. Suddenly the door swings open violently, knocking you off balance. You fall into a dark, endless abyss. Wow. It's a bit dark. Cool. So there's a little bit of improvement still again to the code that I could do. I'm really not sure why it generated 2 images. It's very interesting. A bit of chat. Poppy. I think if you wrote really specific instructions initially, you could make a really cool game. Hey, you say my game isn't cool? Where the options are all really diverse, and you could set limits, e.g. after 10 actions, make 2 and 3 options deadly. Cool. Yeah, definitely. The more complex you make it, the more you can tailor it to how you want it. That is really the power of what we're doing here, and the setup that we have with giving it instructions. Sorry, let me hide this. Giving it some sort of context and then instructions on how to deal with it and in what way to respond. So, for example, giving it saying you have to have a template of a setting and actions array. Yeah, definitely. That'd be a really cool way to do it. And it'd be really interesting if you go away and you take this, Poppy, and you adapt it to these great ideas you're having. Sorry, there's one more question, at least. Is it possible to create a verbal dialogue? I'm thinking about being accessible for everyone. Interesting. I imagine so. I think if you would have to integrate with, you have to grab some of the library, I'm assuming. I don't think in plain HTML you could do this. But if you made this, for example, in, I don't know, React framework, or any other sort of interactive HTML front-end framework, you could use some other third-party library which can take text and sort of read out the text, a bit like the TikTok lady. I've no doubt that must exist. That would be really cool, definitely. Eli, it's a very good and fun idea of the applications of ChatGPT. Thank you. You're welcome. Olivia, thanks, Jules. This was fun. Love debugging too. Glad you enjoyed it. And same for Daddy. Cool. Glad you all enjoyed it.